How does the LIC DSF assess the sensitivity of the baseline projected debt burden indicators to country-specific shocks? For example, if a country is hit by a natural disaster or by a commodity price shock, will those events endanger debt sustainability? To answer those questions, we need to understand the four scenarios that are tailored to country-specific circumstances in the DSF: contingent liabilities, natural disasters, volatility of commodity exports, and market financing shocks. A contingent liability is a debt obligation that does not arise unless particular events take place in the future. For example, subnational debt with guarantees that are likely to be triggered. The contingent liability stress test is used to capture potential debts arising from the public sector, not captured in the baseline. A narrower coverage would result in a larger contingent liability stress test. For example, if a country's debt coverage accounts only for the central government debt, the contingent liability shock will be larger to capture the potential debt vulnerabilities that could arise from the state and local government debt. This shock applies to all countries and involves a one-off increase in the debt to GDP ratio in the second year of the projection. The LIC DSF provides default values for this shock but allows the user to modify them to capture country-specific circumstances. The natural disaster shock applies to small states LICs identified as vulnerable to natural disasters by the IMF and countries that meet the following criteria: a frequency criteria, 2 disasters every 3 years, and an economic loss above 5% of GDP per year. This stress test involves a one-off shock to public debt to GDP in the second year of projection, and the real GDP growth and exports are lower in the year of the shock. The commodity price shock applies to countries whose commodity exports exceed 50% of total exports over the previous 3-year period. Commodity export prices fall by 1 standard deviation and in the second year of projection. In the first 3 years of the shock, the real GDP growth and fiscal revenues to GDP are reduced with respect to the baseline. And in the first year of the shock, the GDP deflator is reduced by the impact of the commodity price gap. The market financing shock applies to countries with market access that have outstanding Eurobonds and/or have access to the international financial markets on a durable and substantial basis. For this shock is noticed an increase in the cost and shortening of maturities of new external commercial borrowing, and one-off nominal exchange rate depreciation in the second year. And in the year of the shock, the exchange rate impacts domestic inflation.